interview, by the way, with ESPN's Rodra. Ned, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of what Raya had to say? Have Sunderland established a blueprint for what to do against Arsenal?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I think there is an element of physicality when you play against Arsenal, which you do have to sort of reach. But then also you have to take your moments. And I think for Sunderland themselves, the way that they've started the season doing so well in the league, the belief that they have with their fans in the stadium as well, and in the game itself, they're just super competitive. I think David Raya made the point, they've come up from the Championship and so on. But if you look at most of that team, most of them weren't in the campaign last season from the Championship. So it's just new to them. But this is how they're going to play. They're going to go toe-to-toe with absolutely anybody. They're not going to try and outpass you. They're not necessarily just going to shell it long all the time. But you know that if you're going to be getting points from them, you're going to have to earn the right to do that. And I think Arsenal basically felt that as of other teams in recent weeks. This is a Sunderland team that beat Chelsea at Stamford Bridge not too long ago as well. But I think to sort of add on to what he was saying, that defensive side of things for Arsenal, I think that love for defending. Once upon a time in sort of my career, you'd hear that in Italy when you'd see goalkeepers high-fiving defenders when they make a tackle and so on. But, for those guys, that's how they do it. They're good defenders individually and they're committed to defending as a collective, and that is from front to back. And that's what makes Arsenal really soft. So in some ways, it was a surprise to see them concede 2 goals away at Sunderland, not least of all because the 2 goals essentially were quite simple. There's somebody missing an assignment from a throw-in, so Dan Ballard basically pushes his way through and scores. And then for the second goal, is it the goalkeeper's ball? Is it the defender's ball? No, it's Brian Broby's ball because he's committed and thrown himself at it. And those are the sort of things which we don't really see Arsenal give up very often. So, yeah, it's a nice reminder for them, but they're still a very strong defensive unit.
Yeah, he threw himself at it, and the man doing the interview wasn't quite as committed, was he, the goalkeeper? if we're being honest about it,
right.
He came out a little hesitant because he knew there was going to be physical contact. Had he really thrown himself out there and outstretched his arms to punch it, he may have just have got there before the attacker and put it in the back of the net. Look, is this ESPN FC finding the crack in the Arsenal? Notice how I said that as if it's not me. Is this the FC way of finding the crack in Arsenal? This is how you get it.
Yeah.
Arsenal can be physical against every team. We've talked about it. This is part of their game that they are equipped to deal with, or should be. They have some of the biggest, most physical players in the Premier League. Here's the news for you. If you're the bulk of the Premier League teams and you try and go toe-to-toe with Arsenal in a game of football, you're probably going to lose, or you're going to come out second best. So you have to find a different way. Long balls, throw-ins, getting it forward quicker, squeezing them in, crosses into the box, being a bit more physical. You're going to have to use all of that, because if you try and take them on in a head-to-head game, they're going to get the better of you. So Sunderland have been very good at that. They've been very good when they've come up to the Premier League about understanding what works for them. The Chelsea game was a classic example. They sat in for long periods of the game and defended stoutly and got the result. So yeah, this is just one for Arsenal that got away. But if you think you can just roll this Arsenal team over, and that's their weak point, I would disagree with that.
Right, that is the problem, isn't it, Gab? If this is the blueprint to get the better of this Arsenal defence, how many other teams in the Premier League can play this way? Fulham aren't playing this way.
No, look, I mean, this was the right way for Sunderland to approach it, but let's not get carried away here. Those goals featured 2, I think, massive individual errors from 2 players who happen to have been 2 of Arsenal's best players this season, Declan Rice and Gabriel. If you want to give some blame to Raya as well, sure. But Declan Rice misjudges the flight of the ball in the first one, and Gabriel gets bullied by Brian Broby, one of the few players who probably is heavier than he is. These guys don't make many mistakes. Occasionally, even the very best make individual errors. It happened, move on. If these guys make individual errors like this next week too, and the week after, sure, then we can talk about maybe things not working in the system, or we can talk about blueprints that work against them. But somebody slipping on a banana peel does not make you a genius. Put it that way.
Yeah. All right, finally, it's International Week, so we've had a bunch of interviews, as you might have noticed. But only one player addressed a subject very dear to your heart, Craig, and that was Matty Cash, who was talking to the football reporters, James Ollie and Rob Dawson. This is what he had to say.
Well, that's the thing. In the World Cup itself, it kind of depends on the opposition, depends how that Norway team will set up and whether, they're going to be the protagonist in games or they're going to be sort of a bit more defensive. I think as this group has sort of been laid out, like as Gab's made the point of, from the moment that they beat Italy, they're in a position to where they're almost trying to run up the score whenever they can. That's not necessarily going to be the sort of feel at the World Cup next year, obviously providing that they don't lose 9-0 to Italy on the weekend. But I think it would be good for them because I remember from the last World Cup, listening to people like Haaland, who was, nearly at the peak of his powers, and he's just there watching the World Cup like every other fan. And to see people of that sort of ability not to get a chance to do it with a side who potentially should have been more in the running to do so, it's going to be good for him this time around. I think he's a player that's still young enough to love the sort of amateur side of football as such, and playing at World Cups, he's not jaded by it whatsoever. This is a big deal for him, it's a big deal for the nation, and looking at the fact that they've scored 33 goals in the group so far, I think it'd be tough to say that they don't deserve it, so more power to them.
I'm pleased for Norway, actually. It's good to see this. It's and it is cyclical. A lot of times you go through these periods. Scotland went through it. They're not playing with the kind of gusto that Norway are playing, but Steve Clarke's managed to get them to a European Championship. He may get them to this World Cup. We'll see. But Norway had the same. You mentioned it. 1998, when I played against them, it's 20 years. They would never have thought, because they were, I think, top 5 in the FIFA rankings back then in 98, and you would not think you're going to drop down as far as they have. But it can happen. I mean, I looked at the team 5 or 6 years ago, I think, when Erling Haaland was just sort of coming into it, and I thought, oh my God, it's a terrible team.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But actually now they've got good strength in most departments. Martin Odergard isn't available or wasn't playing. So he's another one you can throw in there. They got a little bit of strength and depth. They've got that physicality about them. They've got goal scorers, but they can play a little bit as well. And so I'm pleased for them. I mean, obviously, Jan Fjørtof's going to be rubbing it in, as he always does. But it's good to see a country that have struggled for as many years as they have and come through and play in the manner in which they've played, score the goals in which they have. And I think they're going to be I'm not saying they're going to win the World Cup. I don't think they'll come anywhere close. But they're going to be a tough nut to crack, whoever draws them, because they've got good players in the back four, got good players in the middle of the park, and they got a couple of beasts up front that if they get the service up to them, clearly they will score goals.
Mr. Fjørtof last seen doing cartwheels down the streets of Oslo.
And rightly so.
Wish we'd had a camera.
It's not a pretty sight.
Just crowned a good night for England. Again, another clean sheet after 70% of possession and 19 shots. Serbia managing just the one shot on goal, and they are out because of Albania's victory as well. So Albania into the runners-up spot. But all the interest from the England perspective came from Thomas Tuchel's quote before the game, saying, at the moment, if we keep the structure we have, Foden, Bellingham, Kane cannot play together. They can, but not in the structure, not for the balance that we developed, and not for the structure that comes with wingers who are specialists in their position. We will always do what's best for balance, and we'll try to keep the clarity, even if it means we have to take tough decisions. And he didn't start Bellingham tonight. Craig, I don't know if you saw the discussion, the rather fruity discussion we had yesterday about can Kane and Foden and Bellingham play, and what's Bellingham's best position? Is he a number 10? Should he be starting for England?
Well, I don't think he's playing. I don't think he's played quite enough games yet to get his full fitness. We were talking before we came on air. He's looking better than he was at the start of the season because he came off that shoulder surgery, which was delayed because of the Club World Cup, which really was, it's another argument. It was a big no-no for a player, really. But Real Madrid took that decision, so he's been sort of behind the 8 ball catching up, and there's been some, I'll say, animosity between Tuchel in the Bellingham camp, call it what you will, but there's certainly been some aggravation and some words. But I don't really see and listen, this is Tuchel's decision, how he plays and who he plays in what position and what structure. But I hasten to add, I don't think it's very wise to be telling the whole world at this moment in time that the 3 of them can't play together. Yeah. Because if he puts the 3 of them together in America next year and it doesn't work, the English media are going to, what's the first thing they're going to say is, well, you said 6 months ago they couldn't play together, and now you're putting them in there. So, I think he's, why would you hamstring yourself by saying this? Even if you think it, just don't say it, and just, I don't see how they can't play together if that's what you wanted to do. I think, if you want to play Bellingham in the 10, you could play Foden on the right, but then Bukayo Saka plays there. So Morgan Rogers he's signed a new contract at Aston Villa. He's a very good player. Now, is he of Bellingham standard once Bellingham's fully fit? Probably not just yet. Hasn't got that experience. So there are lots of caveats to this, but I don't understand the need for a manager to come out pre-World Cup and say, 3 of my star players cannot play together, because I think that's just shoehorning yourself into a corner.
Gab, as a noted Tuchelista, is there a method to his madness?
I think there's a method, and I think, as a fan, as a football fan, I love the fact that he's honest. And what he's saying is common sense. If you take the whole context, he said, if we play with the structure where we have a center forward and 2 wingers, 2 specialist wingers, I think he said, so that's not Foden, that's not Bellingham, and that's obviously not Harry Kane, then I can't play the 3 of them together. And Kane is going to start because he's a center forward, and then there's 1 slot left. Unless, and this goes to the heart of it, Bellingham decides to go back to his Borussia Dortmund days and he shows that he can play in central midfield, and then maybe there's a spot for Bellingham in place of Elliot Anderson alongside Declan Rice. But that's not an option that's on the table. That's not where he plays for Real Madrid. That's not where he's been playing for England. And by the way, just to add to this, you also have Cole Palmer, who at some point you presume is going to be fit as well. So I love the honesty as a fan. Yeah, media-wise, Craig is absolutely correct. There is no reason to answer this question honestly, but we can't have it both ways, right? We can't demand honesty from the people, from coaches, and then when they're honest, go and say, oh, but you said. Like, if it doesn't work out for him at the World Cup, he's out the door anyway. So I think he figures, might as well be straight with people.
Yeah. Nedum, who's your starting midfield for England right now?
I think given how well Anderson and Rice have played together, I think it has to feature those 2. So as a consequence, it is a case of who's going to be in that 10 or perhaps that slightly more advanced attacking midfielder role. And ultimately, I think Tuchel talking about balance and so on of the team, again, I'm with the guys. You didn't need to come out and say it and be that specific at this moment in time, because that kind of sends a message not just to say the world out there, but also to the players themselves. Because if one of them, say, for example, in training gets given a bib to say you're starting this week, I think one of the others knows that they're not going to be. But from the highlights that we've just seen, I think Harry Kane gets the ball in similar positions to where, say, Bellingham does. But instead of the way that Bellingham's driving with the ball, Harry Kane might play a 40, 50, 60-yard diagonal ball. And we all know he's brilliant at doing that. So I think the Harry Kane situation is the one that's really going to be affecting, say, these number 10s, because it has to be the right sort of partnership. And maybe Morgan Rogers being somebody who can be more patient and stay high, that's perfect for Kane, because Kane will play those long passes. He's at times almost as free to roam wherever he likes, and that can be brilliant for him in those games that are really, really open. But I think it's just a shame in some ways, because he roams. It almost limits the way that you can have like a ball playing number 10 like a Foden, have a ball playing number 10 maybe like a Cole Palmer if he becomes available. So I think it's a tricky situation, but ultimately I think the bigger thing for me is the fact that he likes the balance of Rice and Anderson in there, and I think that's been a big part of why England have been so comfortable in this part of the season so far. I think the fact that the 2 of them can understand when to stay, when to go, really good footballers in terms of passing it around, but then they've also got the ability to drive and be incisive in that final third. I think that's probably more important than deciding which of those guys is going to be in there instead.
There's a lot of tools in that. They've always had in recent years.
Yeah.
A lot of game changers in the final third and goal scorers, particularly in Harry Kane. And he has it again. If you look at, even Anthony Gordon at Newcastle. You've got Saka, you got Cole Palmer, as Gab mentioned. You got Rashford back and playing some good football on loan at Barcelona. You got Morgan Rogers, you got Bellingham, you got Eze, who's I think is a brilliant player. But what we don't know, Adrian, is how these guys will be playing a month before or 6 weeks before the World Cup. Are they in form? Are they injured? Have they been out the team? Are they low in confidence? Things change quickly in this game, and so you put your best pieces of the jigsaw that you think, leading up to a tournament, your squad and your team, but that all goes out the window with one rash tackle or a loss of form. Phil Foden, for example, he's playing much better this year, but he's come out of the doldrums. from Manchester City in the last 18 months. So we really don't know. I mean, we pretty much know if he stays fit, Bukayo Saka.
Yeah.
His consistency is fantastic. But we don't know with the likes of Phil Foden how the rest of this season is going to go, because he has struggled over the last year or so. So that's a big part of what a manager has to plan for.
And last thing on this England midfield jigsaw, is Elliot Anderson indispensable? I mean, is he...
You've got Jordan Henderson back now, haven't you? He's got a roll back a few years there.
But is he...
Well, I think I think Newcastle were actually disappointed to lose him, but there was a PSR issue, and so they had to sell a player. Eddie Howe touched on that. He said, we did not want to lose Elliot Anderson. He's gone to Forest. He's getting more game time. He's proven himself a really good player, and I think at the moment, yes, he is. But as the guys have said, he potentially could drop, Jude Bellingham back a little bit deeper, and make things happen that way. But at the moment, the Rice and Anderson partnership has worked very well for England. So kudos to Elliot Anderson for the way he's playing for club and country.
Yeah. Nedum, the only question is, could Declan Rice perhaps move back there and play that role to shoehorn in the players we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think obviously he could do it because he's such a fantastic player, but then you miss out on some of the attacking threat that he has as well. I think when you see that sort of double pivot in there, you can see the plus side of it all, understanding when to stay, understanding when to go, timing the runs well, knowing whether it's a longer pass, a shorter pass, or even driving with the ball. And I think if you put him into that sixth position, you almost anchor a player that's got so much more to give. And it wouldn't surprise me to say if there are two in there, he could step up and score maybe important goals, get an important assist. But if he's playing in that six, I think it makes him probably a bit too one-dimensional, and you'd be wasting, one of England's best players.
All right, great stuff.
Mikel Arteta's contradictory comments dismissed after Everton versus Arsenal fixture change. Mikel Arteta has faced criticism from sections of the Arsenal fanbase after the Premier League granted the club's request to move their away fixture against Everton forward by 1 day. However, a closer look at Arteta's statements shows there was no real contradiction in his words, only a misunderstanding of priorities. The change means Arsenal will now face Everton on December 20th, rather than on Sunday the 21st, allowing the Gunners an extra day of rest before their Carabao Cup quarter-final against Crystal Palace. From the club's perspective, it's a sensible move to protect player welfare and performance levels during a congested period. Yet for many supporters, the news came as an inconvenience, and in some cases, a financial burden. Fans who had already booked non-refundable travel and accommodation for the original date could now be out of pocket. In response, Arsenal announced that they would provide coach travel to Liverpool for £10 return, but the gesture didn't stop frustration from spilling over on social media. An Arsenal fixture news account on X, formerly Twitter, at AFC Fixture News, summed up the mood. The away match against Everton has been moved to Saturday, December 20th at 8 p.m. thanks to at Arsenal, Mikel Arteta, and at Sky Sports PL. The last train from Liverpool to London departs at 8:12 p.m. Football for the fans. Replies to the post, from an account with over 40,000 followers, were divided. Some supporters even accused Arteta of contradicting earlier comments where he seemed to emphasize the importance of fan welfare. But is that really the case? Having attended the press conferences where Arteta was asked about the scheduling issues before and after the Crystal Palace quarter-final was announced, it becomes clear his comments were taken out of context. Following Arsenal's win over Brighton in the Carabao Cup fourth round, Arteta was asked whether he feared fixture congestion could become a problem. He responded, "I hope not. If we take care of the well-being of both players and our supporters, we should never get to that point. That's our most important value. We have the best league in the world, and we can't lose that by ignoring what makes it special. If we respect that, I'm sure everything will be fine." This was the first time Arteta mentioned both players and supporters together in this specific context, placing them in the same sentence, not necessarily in the same order of importance. Later, when Arsenal were traveling to Prague for their Europa League win over Slavia, the December 23rd date for the Palace match was confirmed. Asked about the potential scheduling clash, Arteta, visibly serious, said, "Hopefully they move the Premier League game, because it doesn't make any sense to play until that late in December. I'm sure they'll make the right decision." When pressed again about the long-term impact of playing 2 matches in 3 days, he clarified his stance. "As I said before, I'm confident the league will apply the right principles, to prioritize the players first, then the supporters, and to make sure things remain fair for all clubs." In other words, Arteta's position has been consistent. His hierarchy, players first, then fans, reflects the practical realities of management. From a sporting point of view, that's not unreasonable. His job, ultimately, is to give Arsenal the best chance of winning matches, and playing 2 high-intensity games within 72 hours would compromise that goal while increasing injury risks. That said, the disruption to fans is real and shouldn't be dismissed. Arsenal have tried to mitigate the damage, offering affordable coach travel to Merseyside. It's not an afterthought. The club has made similar efforts before. For instance, earlier this season they organized a chartered train service for the trip to Manchester. The pilot program was later cancelled due to low uptake, but supporters were refunded, and coach travel was again arranged at less than half the train fare. Still, some pointed to restrictions on alcohol consumption on those buses as a reason for the lack of enthusiasm among travelers. A small but telling example of the balancing act clubs face between fan experience and logistical responsibility. As someone traveling to Liverpool on the new date to cover the match, it's easy to empathize with supporters' frustration. Plans are disrupted, and expenses add up. Yet, from a footballing standpoint, it's equally clear why the adjustment was necessary. In the end, the accusation that Arteta betrayed his words doesn't hold up. His comments were consistent with his role, a manager whose first duty is to protect his players and the team's ability to compete. While supporters deserve respect and consideration, ensuring player welfare, and by extension, the club's chances of success, inevitably comes first. The debate highlights a broader tension that runs through modern football, the struggle to balance fan experience with the relentless demands of the sporting calendar. For Arteta, it's not about choosing one over the other, but about finding a way to keep both sides moving in the same direction. The scheduling change has sparked broader discussions about fixture congestion and the growing disconnect between football authorities and match-going supporters. While the Premier League's decision ultimately favored Arsenal's sporting interests, it reignited long-standing frustrations among fans who feel that television broadcasters, rather than clubs or supporters, dictate the modern football calendar. Several supporter groups voiced their disapproval following the announcement. The Football Supporters Association, FSA, released a statement calling for greater transparency in fixture scheduling, emphasizing the financial and logistical strain late changes impose on fans. Once again, supporters are being treated as an afterthought, the statement read. When games are moved at short notice for broadcast or scheduling purposes, fans are left out of pocket. This has to change. These concerns have grown louder in recent years as fixture lists become increasingly congested, with Premier League clubs competing in multiple domestic and international competitions. December, in particular, is notorious for its relentless schedule, and managers have repeatedly warned that player fatigue and injuries are becoming inevitable outcomes of such intensity. Arteta's comments, prioritizing player welfare first, then fans, reflect a reality shared by many top-flight managers. Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, and Erik ten Hag have all voiced similar frustrations about scheduling in recent months. Guardiola, after Manchester City's December fixtures were adjusted for television, remarked that the players are not machines, echoing the same sentiment that underpins Arteta's reasoning. Yet, despite the alignment among managers, fans often find themselves caught in the middle. They shoulder the financial and emotional burden of fixture changes while being told those changes are made in the name of fairness or player protection. In practice, those decisions often serve commercial partners first, particularly broadcasters who push for prime-time slots to maximize viewership. From Arsenal's perspective, the fixture change is undeniably beneficial. Playing Everton on the 20th instead of the 21st gives Arteta's side 2 full days of rest before the Carabao Cup quarter-final against Crystal Palace, an important fixture as the Gunners continue their pursuit of silverware on multiple fronts. It also reduces the risk of injuries at a time when the squad has been stretched thin by European and domestic commitments. Internally, sources close to the club maintain that the request for a schedule adjustment was made solely based on player welfare and sporting integrity, not with disregard for supporters. Arsenal's communication staff are said to have worked closely with fan liaison officers to ensure alternative travel options were available, though they acknowledge that such measures can never fully compensate for the inconvenience caused. Meanwhile, the Premier League defended its decision, citing the need to maintain competitive balance across the fixture list. A league spokesperson explained that changes of this nature are reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and that input from clubs, broadcasters, and local authorities is taken into account. However, critics argue that such explanations have become formulaic, offering little real comfort to fans who consistently bear the consequences of late scheduling shifts. The ripple effects of this incident extend beyond Arsenal. Supporter groups from other clubs have pointed to it as yet another example of how fan priorities are sidelined in the modern game. There are renewed calls for an independent review of fixture planning and for a minimum notice period before changes are approved, proposals that have circulated for years but never gained traction. For Arteta, however, the matter seems settled. His focus remains on maintaining squad fitness and momentum heading into a decisive period of the season. While the debate over priorities will continue, his stance, that the health and performance of players must come first, reflects a pragmatic, if unpopular, truth in modern football. In the end, the controversy around Arsenal's fixture change underscores a growing divide between the business of football and the experience of football. Managers like Arteta operate in a results-driven environment where every decision is judged by points and trophies. Fans, on the other hand, live the consequences of those decisions, in time, travel, and loyalty. The real challenge for English football now lies in bridging that gap, ensuring that the pursuit of success on the pitch doesn't come at the expense of the very people who fill the stands.